Hi everyone, I'm Clare Matysova. I'm Athena SWAN Project Officer at UEL. I'm presenting today with Kirstie Axtens, that's right. And we're presenting on developing a flexible working environment. I'm going to hand over in a second to Kirstie, who's going to give a kind of a broader perspective from the Working Families organisation in how they support organisations in developing flexible working culture. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about UEL, what we're doing at UEL, what the current picture is and what our kind of next steps are.
Great, thank you, Claire. So I'm just going to go click to next. Right, first of all, just a few words about who we are and what we do. Working Families has been around in various guises for getting on for 40 years. Initially, when we started work, we were focusing very much about getting women back into the workplace. Over the years, things have moved on, and a lot of our conversations with employers nowadays are as well as being about mothers, it's actually also about how we can encourage men to be fathers and carers in the workplace. And we work with government on policy. So we have three main strands. We have a team of employment lawyers and benefits advisors who run a helpline, who advise parents and carers on all matters to do with maternity, paternity and flexible working. And sadly, even in this day and age, the majority of our calls are around maternity discrimination, which is still sadly very alive and kicking. We also work with employers, so we have a system of employer members. I have about 100 or so employer members, and we work with them about changing the culture of their organisations so that they are supportive of flexible working or agile working, but also what we call family-friendly policies, which probably really should be renamed people-friendly policies, because we're not just talking about policies which support parents and carers, but actually they're about policies that support all the people. And finally, we work with government and policymakers. So in recent years, we've been instrumental in the introduction of the right to request flexible working and most recently, shared parental leave. So I'm just going to run through, I've just got a couple of slides to look at today. And this is really, these are based on the work that we do with employers, and we all our employer members do a benchmarking process with us, where we look at their family-friendly policies and their flexible working. And so we're drawing on that sort of research. And I just wanted to share with you some of the reasons that employers are now looking at flexible working, whether they call that flexible working nowadays. We also have smart working, dynamic working, agile working, but call it what you will. It's a different way of work being done. And these are the main reasons that employers tell us that they are really trying to embed a different way of working in their organisations. It's, if you like, it's their business case. Initially, one of the obvious ones is a better alignment of the workforce with demands. I've been working with NHS employers recently around looking at, how you can match the sort of where people are needed with their own needs and desires for working. So it's about being able to cover the peaks and troughs. It's also about sort of multi-skilling people so that you can actually encourage people to be working across a wider range of roles, perhaps. So it's basically the way that we're all now needing to work and provide our services. Recruitment and retention, that's historically, in a way, the original business case for flexibility was actually about retaining women in the workforce. And you all know, I'm sure, the costs of recruitment. I mean, when I talk to employers, they set that cost at anything between 15% and 150%. That's a huge amount of money that you're constantly churning out every time you have to recruit someone. So there's some very obvious savings to be made in terms of recruitment. And in terms of retention, again, we all know that when you lose somebody, you're losing that organisational knowledge, you're losing those contacts with customers and relationships with customers. So it really doesn't make sense to let that talent walk out of your door. Research shows, and we do a piece of research every year called the Modern Families Index, which surveys employees across the UK. And it's very clear from that if people don't have the flexibility that they want and need, they will leave, they will move on, they'll go somewhere else. And increasingly, we're seeing this again with the male population. We're probably not terribly surprised to hear that women move if they don't get the flexibility they want. We're hearing very strongly from particularly men between the ages of about 24 and 35 that they also are looking to move on if their employers are not going to give them the flexibility that they want as well. Cost savings. There are obvious cost savings that you can look at when you're looking at a more flexible and agile workforce. You know, some of the really obvious ones are things like a reduction in real estate. I work with a lot of employers who are trying to condense their workforces into fewer physical properties. There are obvious savings to be made there. There are savings in business travel. Organisations that are making better use of technology and using video conferencing and those sorts of things are able to demonstrate reductions in travel costs, for instance. So again, it's really important for organisations to be able to, and it kind of goes back to all the conversations this morning about data, is about monitoring and measuring and having evidence and showing the cost savings. Engagement, performance and productivity. Almost every day I seem to listen to the news and they're talking about UK's productivity and how low it is, etc., etc. There's lots of research out there, and employers report to us all the time that they feel that flexibility is a way of engaging, increasing engagement in their workforce, and that an increasingly engaged workforce is going to perform better. You're going to get better productivity. I did come across a stat that the Work Foundation found that employees that were more engaged were also 43% more productive. And there are plenty of other stats out there that demonstrate that same thing. And certainly when we've seen organisations that have introduced a new way of working, again, they have when they've monitored and measured it, they can show a real correlation to increased productivity. Well-being and resilience. Again, I know we're not allowed to say. I know we're sort of slightly not allowed to say it anymore. But you know, bringing your whole self to work, in the sense that if you are comfortable, that you know that you can sort of be who you are. You know, will enable you to, you know, feel better about yourself. And again, that your sense of well-being. There are lower levels of sickness absence for organisations that use flexibility really well. There are better levels of mental health as well. So again, flexibility can help you on all sorts of levels. Diversity and gender, obviously very much the theme of today's event. We certainly are always encouraging employers to recruit flexibly. It's not a case of flexibility is only allowed to be given to somebody who's already in your organisation. Lots of people out there who want jobs, want flexible jobs. And you need to be very clear in all your advertising that the roles that you are advertising could be done flexibly, which also obviously means a lot of work with your hiring managers, getting them to understand how to dissect a role, if you like, and see how it can be done differently. A lot of organisations we work with nowadays are coming from a starting point of any role can have flexibility in it somehow. It's not the same level of flexibility, and there's a business case for every single role, but actually every role you can find some flexibility in it. The other thing about flexible working is around the sort of impacts in terms of gender. Traditionally, obviously, flexible working was always just something for mums, but increasingly we're certainly seeing men want to work flexibly, and the more you encourage men to work flexibly, the less flexible working becomes a mum's thing, and that whole gender stereotype of women who women care and men work will gradually be getting eroded. And certainly, again, from the research we do, dads, the millennial dads, want to be far more hands-on when it comes to childcare and taking care of their children than perhaps their fathers were. So there's a real expectation there. And it really is enabling men to be the care. You know, we haven't talked that much about men in some ways, but you know, enabling men to be the sort of carers and parents that they want to be has obviously got to be good for engagement. Career progression, flexible working has sometimes been used as a sort of a reason why women don't progress in the workplace, and certainly you've got to be able to look at all your processes and practices to make sure that those biases that we've been talking about, you know, are not inbuilt into your systems. But on the other side of that same coin, flexibility can be a way for women to continue working full-time hours, but doing them flexibly. It can be a way of doing a really sort of career-enhancing, capital-intensive job on a flexible basis or reduced hours basis, for instance, if they do part-time. So flexible working, as I say, can be used as a way to help women progress through the organisation. There was some research recently, I think research at the University of Kent, who showed that women who worked flexibly before they had children were much less likely to want to work reduced hours once they came back to work. Women who didn't work flexibly before they had their child were more likely to reduce their hours because they couldn't really quite see how it was going to work otherwise. Whereas if flexible working is something that everybody does and is the way we work here, it just means that when someone's thinking about coming back to work after having a child, they already know how to do flexible working. So I think you know, that, as I say, that would I'd be quite happy to sort of pass on those details, that research details to you. And finally, expectation and demand. Again, I think it's just going with the grain of people's lives now. People want to be able to work in a slightly different way. They can perform better if they're working in a slightly different way. And it's not just about parents and carers, it's about everyone. I think someone mentioned this morning, you know, people want to work flexibly because they have sporting ambitions, or they want to do education, or apparently, according to employers, pet care is quite a big reason for people wanting to work flexibly. So it's not just about, you know, women of a certain age in a certain part of your organisation. Flexibility or agile working is something that everybody could benefit from, you know, whether they're starting off as an apprentice at 16 years old, or whether they're thinking about retiring in a few years' time, but kind of want to go to sort of reduce hours slowly over that time. That's the reason why people do it. I'm not actually, because I'm conscious of time as well, so I'm just leaving that there with you. So embedding flexibility is not actually dissimilar to the last slide that you guys just did in terms of, you know, the business case, lead from the top, change that conversation, lots and lots and lots of line manager support. We do a lot of work with line managers for employers. They're the gatekeepers. They really create a culture. You've got to support them in these areas. Communicate and communicate and communicate and communicate, and monitor, measure impact. Again, we do, in our annual benchmark, the section that most employers find the most difficult is the one where we ask lots of data. And you really can't, as I think somebody said this morning, you can't manage what you don't measure. And so you've got to be able to do that. And that's what the organisations that do this successfully, that is what they do. I'm now going to be quiet and pass over to Claire, who's going to talk to you a bit more detail about an actual case study.
Okay, so yes, I'm going to talk a little bit about where we're at UEL in terms of flexible working. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm Athena SWAN Project Officer at UEL. So for people that don't know what Athena SWAN is, I'll just explain that to start. So Athena SWAN is a charter mark that's managed by the Equality Challenge Unit, and it aims to recognise what universities, higher education is doing to promote gender equality broadly. So that involves a self-assessment process, looking at every aspect of your organisation, in terms of your pipeline. Where are women dropping out of the pipeline? Looking at progression, retention, recruitment, all of those different things. And flexible working, family-friendly policy is just one aspect of that. We've just been successful in getting the Athena SWAN Bronze Award in October, so this is good news for the institution. It's the first step. It means that we've got an action plan in place, essentially. It doesn't mean that everything's all right. It means we've got an action plan and we've identified what the issues are. So in terms of flexible working, we're as it said, it links to Athena SWAN. It also links to our equal pay audit that we have to do, and we recognise that the flexible work has got an impact in terms of how we address our equal pay gap. And it links to, like Kirstie was saying, staff engagement, recruitment and retention, etc. So I don't know how well you can read that, but kind of like considering where we're at in terms of flexible working. So the top, what is work-life balance, what is flexible working? The top two is a background, it's a background issue that gets in the way of work. It's about the individual, it's about working to support that individual on an individual case-by-case basis. It's a legal obligation. And at the bottom, it's much more changing that kind of view of flexible working, that it's actually much more about looking at what the barriers are. It's a social model and removing the barriers. So at the moment, we're kind of more towards the top. So, but we want to be moving much more down towards the bottom and addressing the social inequality, so that's where it links to equal pay. So I mentioned that we've recently gone through the Athena SWAN self-assessment process. So that involves quite a lot of consultation, similar to the previous presenters, talking a lot to staff. So we did a survey, a gender equality survey. So this is just a couple of the questions. So the top table there is about the working culture. So what do people feel about the working culture? And you can see across UEL, so for men, positivity was 72%, for women's 59%, so it's quite different. But then between the different services, we've got STEM subjects, STEM academic subjects, and then non-STEM academic subjects. You can see for the non-STEM actually is a really big difference, 82, 40% is a big difference. And the services actually look the same, but if you drill down, there's actually quite big differences. We've got pockets of good practice and pockets of not so good. And then the bottom one is looking at how do people feel about their ability to progress if they work part-time flexibly, and that's quite a low score there across the board. And we did quite a lot of qualitative stuff as well, so we had a lot of conversations. We've had, our women's network's actually been very active, so we've had a lot of feedback through there. We've had focus groups, so we've got quite a good picture of where staff feel we're at. We also used the Working Families benchmarking exercise, which was really useful in terms of identifying where our policies are as well, in terms of what other organisations are doing. So from that, we have our action plan to develop a more inclusive, flexible working environment to support our staff, our academic and support staff. And it's basically kind of split into four main areas. So about developing capacity and resources. So it's like looking at external resources such as working with working families. It's about that developing the culture change, which is huge. About the communication, the developing and promoting improved guidance and making the guidance much more accessible to people. And then going forward, this is kind of more into the future, we'll be looking at parent carers network, setting that up. So in terms of next steps is actually now we've actually got to start doing some of this, and we have started, but some of it's easier than others. So we've got some of the help from working families. We're doing quite a lot around looking at our policies and improving it, making it more accessible, but also about the promotion side. So developing where we've got good practice, developing case studies and making those much more visible, both internally for UEL staff, but also externally on our job vacancy pages. At the moment, our vacancy pages are very bland, but we want to be able to show that it is a positive place to work. So we've got quite good case studies. So, for example, for shared parental leave, which is a new legislation, not everyone knows about it, and we've actually had a couple of people now, men, taking shared parental leave within UEL. So we really want to. We've got those case studies now. We really want to be able to promote that and make it kind of so people are more aware. And then the last area is this huge culture change, which I think is very much focusing on supporting the line managers. And our next step really will be about identifying. So we've done quite a lot with staff and identifying barriers, but I think in terms of changing the mindset of managers, it will be looking at what do they perceive as the barriers and how can we support them, and bringing in the good practice as well, so that we can kind of share that where it does work, that other managers can do the same. Yeah, and I've been told to wrap it up, so.